Hey, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, good day, wherever you are. Welcome to this edition of our show. Today we are going to be looking at the correlation between Marxism and secularism, and we are also going to learn a little bit more about Marxism. I think there's a lot of overlap between, these different schools of thoughts, and today we've got joining us from our team, Hein and Ian, and I would like to introduce our guest as well, Leophilius. How are you tonight, Leo?
Howdy, I'm doing well.
Great. I think you should just start us off with a little bit of a background, Leo, and just tell us in essence, what is the ideology behind Marxism firstly, how it is implemented, and then we can also maybe look at how it overlaps with the whole secularism aspect of our show tonight.
Sure. So Marxism, traditionally at least, and there are, particularly in today's age, a few different varieties of Marxism, but pretty much all Marxists are going to agree on three central features of the theory. That is, in this order: dialectical materialism, historical materialism, and the labor theory of value. Now, that last one we can touch on, but that one, that is some more difficult stuff there, because there's a lot of economics and there's quite a bit of mathematics behind how Marx and Engels derived the things that they said about capitalism as a mode of production and all that. But to start with dialectical materialism, this one can also be somewhat difficult, because a lot of the ideas that Marx and Engels used when they developed it came from a lot of Hegelian philosophy. They would have, when they were younger, identified as young Hegelians. Now, I don't really know anything about Hegel, because as almost anybody who's at least attempted to read him, I don't know if you can actually read him. I think you can only attempt it, because the things that he writes down are quite difficult to understand. I'm probably not going to get much into why the word dialectical appears in the term dialectical materialism.
I was going to ask you about that.
I mean, I can if you guys would like me to, but that's where that harder Hegelian stuff tends to come in. And me personally, I don't think that's very important to really understanding what the primary, I guess you could say, operation of dialectical materialism is in the broader theory. That is,
from my own perspective, and just throwing this out there, because I am coming at this from a very layperson type of position. I have no idea what dialectical materialism actually is. If you could tell us what that is, the why of it is less important than the what of it to me.
Yeah, so dialectical materialism is, now, Marx probably would not have liked me using this word, but I think it's a good word to use, is importantly the sort of the metaphysic that the whole theory rests on. It starts with the idea, you might say 3 or 4 fundamental ideas in specifically dialectical materialism, depending on who you ask. There's the idea that the world, as in the universe, reality, is nothing but material, that it operates solely under its own accord, under its own laws and regularities and all that stuff, and that it is in a state of consistent and dynamic change. Nothing is ever static in reality. So that's the simplest way to really sum up what dialectical materialism is, that's the metaphysical foundation upon which the rest of the historical materialism and then the labor theory of value, each one kind of comes out of the other. You start with dialectical materialism, you take that viewpoint that the world is just mere material. It's sort of similar to like naturalism or physicalism in the metaphysical sense, the idea that it's just the physical natural world out there. It only operates under its laws. There's nothing on the outside doing magic stuff in here, and it's always consistently changing and evolving in dynamic ways. We can take those ideas.
I'm on board with that. Like no woo-woo, no magic, no spooky, no spooky knob twiddler setting things up. And
Exactly. So that's sort of that foundational aspect. I can kind of jump into how that applies to historical materialism, or I can entertain any questions about dialectical materialism before moving onward.
From my side of things, I'm quite happy with that definition. I'd love to know how it develops into the historic materialism.
Yeah. So what Marx, after he developed this sort of this metaphysical worldview that it's kind of like just like I said, a physicalist perspective, he said, well, when we apply this to societies, what this means is that when we want to understand, because what Marxism primarily is an anthro-historiologic analytic methodology. It's a method utilized for analyzing the structure of human societies, how they progress forward, and the reasons that may underlie why human society is structured in the ways that it is and why it develops forward in time in the ways that it does. So that's really what Marx and Engels as well were trying to do. And so taking this materialist dialectical view with respect to reality, we can then apply that to human society and understand human society thoroughly as a feature of the natural world that isn't influenced by anything non-material, non-physical, and that much like everything else in reality, human society is not ever static. It is continuously developing. How is it then that human societies develop? Well, what Marx would have said, and this is where him and Engels would have deviated from Hegel and from the other idealists who thought that human society progresses as we develop better ideas about how to do things and then work together to implement them. Marx said, that's kind of dumb. That's not how it works. Human society progresses forward as a result of conflicts between differing classes in society. So you might have your royalty. Now, the conditions under which your royalty, your aristocracy historically would have lived would have been vastly different than the serfs that were working in their fields. And it's the difference in those material conditions under which these different classes live that informs different interests. And it is an antagonism between a conflict between these differing interests that ultimately roils over in what Marx called revolutions. And what that means specifically in this context, it's not, violence and let's kill each other. I mean, think about the scientific revolution. Scientists weren't going out there shooting each other and stabbing them with bayonets and fighting on big ships on the sea. That's not what the scientific revolution was. It was a revolution much the way that Marx would have understood the term. Rapid and radical change occurring quickly that further progresses human society. And that progress in human society is not a result of us getting better ideas about how to do things and then doing them. It arises because of the conflicts. We progress because of the conflicts between the differing classes. The lower classes, which is where pretty much all humans that have ever existed have been in, will effectively just reject the interests of the upper echelons of society, and through revolutions, which can be violent, will force change onto society that further develops the productive forces, the means through which we as humans produce all the things that we need to maintain our existence on this planet. It will further develop those productive forces, which will in turn foster further social development. And I would say, just as a final note, that I think that if we look back at history, this is what we see. We don't see a slow, steady development. We see jumps and then things kind of stave off a little bit. And then we see another jump and then things kind of, stave off again. And then we see another jump. It seems that society does kind of progress this way. And it seems that largely these progressions are the result of conflicts between different classes of individuals and the ultimate rejection of interests in the upper classes by the lower classes, and them ultimately forcing change on society, usually by rejecting the interests of the upper classes trying to impose their interests on them.
Right.
I genuinely find that absolutely fascinating, and that's at least largely because I don't know if you can see the background behind me is our Houses of Parliament. That's where I'm hoping my future office is going to be.
Oh yeah,
I'm actually Yeah, exactly. I am actually trying to stand for election. I'm trying to get elected as a member of parliament at some stage in the future. And one of the main things that I am looking at as part of my campaign is a concept of basically the slogan, "You deserve better." And it's, you deserve better than this, but it's also, you deserve better treatment by the people who run the country. You deserve to be considered. You deserve everyone, regardless of their level of wealth, to be subject to the same laws, to be subject to the same taxes.
Yeah.
So this idea of almost a quiet or a civil revolution, I think that really fits what I am looking to achieve.
Can I add on to that really quickly?
Of course.
So, and a Marxist or Marxian, there's two different words you can use there, like me, is going to say that the reason in our society, even today, that laws seem to not really ever apply to super rich and powerful people, the reason that things like that, the reason that our broader social institutions, our governments, royalty, aristocracy, all the broad social institutions that humans live under, the reason why it seems that not just today, but all throughout human history, these institutions have not served the interests of humans broadly is because of their being captured by a class of individuals with undue, and I would argue personally, immoral amounts of wealth and power, who use that wealth and power to influence these broader social systems to serve their interests as a class, which I would argue near exclusively comes to the detriment of our societies broadly. And this is why even today our democratic governments, personally, and there's probably going to be a lot of people that disagree with this, I don't think any country is democratic. I think we've made a lot of progress in those areas, but I do not think that any country is really democratic. And most Marxists probably aren't, because they're going to say that part of freedom and liberty isn't just social freedom and liberty. It's economic freedom and liberty, and that cannot be had under a class society. That's what Marx is criticizing. That's where most of our problems in society come from. Might seem somewhat reductionist. I do not at all think it is, but it's class society. Different classes of individuals with different interests, and people at the higher ends having the economic capital, the ownership over the means through which humans have produced things and done things, that they have the power to influence those very systems to benefit them to the detriment of our societies broadly.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that, and I think it's really interesting when you look at the development of political power, especially in I say especially within the UK in the whole. We have obviously had massive changes in who has political power over the years. So go back to 1066 and it's all the king. The king pretty much owns everything and also has all the power. And then for a number of centuries, it's the king has all the power, but the wealth gradually moves to the largest aristocrats in the country. And then it's what, Charles the First, where power inevitably ultimately shifts from the king to Parliament when we decapitated the reigning monarch at the time, and since then I think it's probably fair to say that while power has been in Parliament, it hasn't shifted away from the vastly wealthy. So those who have a huge amount of wealth, often stemming back to that 1066 when the Normans came and invaded the country, they retain an unbelievable influence over our legislative system, and of course over any changes to our legislative system that make it a little bit fairer for everyone. So while they have all that power and they can stop other people from getting power, of course they're going to feather their own nest and basically I don't know, retain power for themselves in the long run. So, unfortunately, the system as it currently stands is really, really difficult to change because
Mm-hmm.
in order to change it, we have to first gain power, which is really difficult to do because power is controlled by a relative few.
Yep,
Yeah.
the same people who hold the power to change our systems are the same people who know that changing the systems would not serve their class interests. And
Yeah,
this is
exactly.
another thing that I want to touch on because I think it's an interesting point, is that I get a lot of friends and a lot of people that tell me, oh well, but if I like became a billionaire or something, I would try to do my best to solve these problems. No, you wouldn't. Your interests would change because you're now thrust into an entirely different class. It's not to say your interests are going to change immediately, but somebody who won a $1 billion lottery, like a jackpot, let's say they end up walking away with half of it, $500 million. They don't spend it all right away. They have that wealth for the most part for the rest of their life. In 20 or 30 years, their interests are not going to be what they were before they won because they've lived in a different class for so long that it's informed different interests. The interests that we have as humans is informed by the classes that we fall into. And this is why, when we look throughout history, the people who have developed science, technology, literature, art, these weren't people working 12 to 16 hours a day in the fields, toiling, day after day. They were the aristocrats. They were the wealthy because those people had the material conditions. They lived under the material conditions to have the free time to be able to pursue those goals, other goals rather than meeting their immediate material needs. Unlike the lower classes whose interests are more meeting my immediate material needs by going and working and earning a wage, and then I just don't have any time to pursue all those other interests I may have. And that's why, like, you look at Isaac Newton, was born in an aristocratic family. You look at people like Sir Francis Bacon. You look at all these big names throughout history that helped, carry society forward with their ideas. These were not like poor people that worked in fields because those people simply don't.
The time and the money to do what they need to do.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, the people in the lower classes simply don't. They're not interested in those things because they don't live under the conditions that can inform those interests. I can't sit and read books and learn things and try to solve complex problems in mathematics and win a Fields Medal when I have to work 8 to 10 hours a day, 5 or 6 days a week. I don't have any time to do that. So where are my interests going to be? I need food, I need water, I need shelter, I need medicine, I need healthcare. And I have to, at least currently, maybe not so much back then, or at least not in the same way as it is today, I have to sell my labor to somebody else to earn the income, to purchase those things, to meet those needs, which leaves me no time to pursue any other interests I may have.
But so how would that be different in a Marxist society?
Well, so the term Marxist society is a bit confusing to me because the thing that needs to be understood about Marxism is that Marxism is not a normative theory. Marxism is not, it's not an idea that tells us what we ought or ought not do, how we ought or ought not act. So I, along with most Marxists I know, are going to say that a country can't be a Marxist country in much the same way that a country can't really be a scientist country. What would it mean to say that this is a scientist country? That's not what scientist means. So a country itself can't really be Marxist.
Yeah, you get what I mean. I mean, we're not going to split hairs about about the nitty gritty of the definition. I'm just saying. I'm trying to understand. So that's why I'm asking these questions, and I know you have a very specific view on this. I'm interested in the implementation. So what interests me is I would like to know what would it be like to live in a country that's governed, or has at its core function or its constitution been influenced heavily by Marxist ideas and Marxist ideologies. What would it look like for a working class person living in that kind of a society? What would be different?
Well, in that kind of society, there would be no working class because there would be no classes. The
Everybody
concept
would
of,
be working class.
well, no, there would be no class to put people into. You just would not classify. You would just have humans, not rich, not poor, not working, not owner. The whole concept of class, out the window. That's one of the big things about Marxism is class society, this hierarchical structure to society where power and wealth is held exclusively by those at the top. That whole system, gone.
Yeah.
Doesn't
And
exist.
value judgments on people's ability and capacity to contribute, because surely you recognize that a person, for example, that's splitting atoms at CERN has a different value in society than a person that's sweeping the streets. You know, how would you attach value to different professions, for example? What would the incentive be for a person to invest, like years and years of study in their life and to achieve something where they intrinsically would have the same value as another person? I'm just not understanding the egalitarian aspect, I suppose, of this.
So
forgive me if I'm
just
asking
jump in with a comment
please.
before, just give you time to think about that one, Leo, because that was quite an in-depth question. I just wanted to say, actually, one of the things that has most impressed me in terms of traveling around to different cultures was a trip I made to Japan, where every morning that we walked out, the residents of a street would come out and they would sweep the street, and they would take that particular pride. It didn't matter what they did in their day-to-day jobs. It didn't matter whether they were a heart surgeon or a bin collector. It didn't matter to them. They were all part of a collective that was trying to achieve a positive outcome for themselves, for those that come down the streets, and so on. And we see it when there are big sporting events, and we get the Japanese fans. They usually get into the papers because after the event they will take a few minutes to pick up all of their rubbish and bag it and take it with them when they leave. So they try to leave the stadium in as pristine a position as they possibly can. And I think that sort of lends itself a little bit towards this ideal that we're thinking about, where we don't have someone whose job it is to clean up after everyone else. We actually shift our view to one where, you know what, we're all in it together. We all genuinely try to make life better for everyone.
Yeah.
I dropped in front of you there, but
no, that's fine. To answer Dean's question first, I would say that the reason that somebody would invest years of study to earn, like, say, a PhD in physics, I don't think that's going to be any different than why somebody does that now. Myself being very much interested in physics, as pretty much anybody in the chat, and Wes will tell you, I'm not interested in physics because there's like lots of money in it, because I don't think that's true. I'm interested in physics because I'm interested in physics.
A very, very big surprise, I think, if
that
was the case.
I think that people who go pursue PhDs don't. Obviously, there's probably some instances where this isn't true, as few and as even further between as they are. But at the same time, I don't think that most people who go to university and earn a PhD are doing it for ulterior motives like money or wealth or power. Again, there might be, outliers to that, but I just don't think that they're going to override the general trend of people doing it because they I like physics. It's fun. It's interesting. I like to learn about it. I would go get a PhD so that I have more knowledge and can try to develop different ideas. I don't care about the money. And in a Marxist society, in a truly Marxist society, the concept of currency wouldn't even exist. Currency wouldn't exist in a society that's attempting to live under Marxian ideals.
Yeah, I get that.
Fair to compare it to the Federation in Star Trek, then.
Yeah, that's an example, sort of a sci-fi, a fictional example of something that how a society would be structured if it were adopting Marxist modes of analysis. I think Titan's right there.
Yeah, but it was the first thing that came to mind. Like I probably didn't think that one through. So what you're describing to me, Leo, sounds to me like you are at heart an idealist and a dreamer. Because for me the practical implication of these concepts, like I'm just wondering, the scale and the absolute carnage that this kind of an application of these principles would be and wreak on the world as it currently stands is what's going to be the only barrier, because it sounds to me like this utopian dream of egalitarian humanity, which really resonates with the humanist in me, like it really resonates with me on a very deep level. The only thing, like I said, is what really concerns me is how you would practically implement this, and like you mentioned, at the core of it, it's a revolutionary ideology. It's meant to really shake things up. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Leo? How would one practically implement this kind of a society? Would it have to start in a bath of blood and finish off with significant redistribution of people's wealth, which they are going to be very reluctant to part with? How do you see this being implemented in the long run?
So I would first reject the notion that I'm an idealist. I am not. I am thoroughly opposed to idealism, and
I didn't mean it as a pejorative. Forgive me.
I know. It's not that I took it as an offense. It's just I am not an ideal. I don't accept those notions. And I should also mention that Marxism is not utopian, not even remotely. In fact, both Marx and Engels were very critical of utopian socialism that was more born out of the French Revolution. And then, taking that versus what was called, I believe, by Proudhon, I can't remember his first name, the scientific socialism that Marx and Engels had developed. In fact, Engels, in his book, Socialism, Utopian and Scientific, he actually juxtaposes the utopian socialism that came before them with the scientific socialism, as Proudhon dubbed it, and shows how, while they have some good ideas, they are unidealistic. It's sort of this, if we kind of all just hold hands and sing Kumbaya, the world will get better. And Marx and Engels said that's not how it works. With respect to implementing these ideas, I can't speak to how that's done. Marxism doesn't tell us what to do or what not to do. It's much like, think of like electromagnetism. Nothing in like classical electromagnetism or even quantum electrodynamics is going to tell us whether we ought or ought not develop electricity or computers or computer programming. We chose to take the things that we understood through electromagnetism as a theory and develop technologies that improve human lives. So with respect to how do we implement Marxism, I don't see it as a thing to be implemented. It would be like asking, how do we implement electromagnetism? I'm not sure what that means. With respect to how do we take Marxism as an analysis of society and improve society based on that analysis? I can't answer that question alone. I don't think anybody can, even if they're not a Marxist. I think that developing human society and progressing it forward is very much a cooperative effort that's going to take a lot of different ideas from a lot of different people. And a final thing I want to say is that you're right. I don't think Marxism can be utilized to change society right now. But that's not because there's something faulty with Marxism. It's because we don't currently live under the productive forces that would inform a change into a society that would be developed based off of a Marxian analysis. That being said, I think that we are currently in the process of getting there. I think that we are right now, as we can see globally, at the start of the next revolution. I think more and more and more humans are rejecting the capitalist mode of production because I think that they are recognizing that all the problems that existed in society before we had capitalism still exist, and that therefore the system is not meaningfully addressing these issues. How we change is not something I can answer. I don't think any of you can answer it. I don't think anybody can. It's going to take all of us. It's going to be a cooperative effort of humans to move society forward and to figure out the best ways to do that.
Yeah.
I have a question if you don't. Oh, sorry. No, carry on. Hein.
Yeah. I was trying to comment on this. I mean, whatever our economic systems and societal systems are, we'll be needing politics to change things. I mean,
I agree.
Even a good old violent, let's torch the public buildings kind of revolution will not solve that one, will not solve the problem, will not get us to a Marxist society. So we will be needing a political system, and we should tinker at our political system because they definitely do not work, at least not well enough. But that's the kind of thing we're thinking of. And I mean, I've been a member of several political parties in my life, the Communist Party, the Socialist Party. I'm not a party member at the moment. But it is the idea, essentially, getting influence through Parliament and pushing to improve living conditions for the people who need that.
I mean, I definitely agree with that. I think that political, broad, somewhat centralized social systems are probably going to exist in human society for at least, well, I mean, depending on how one understands that, they might say that we're always going to have systems like that in human society because we're going to have to find ways to organize society. But I would say that I don't think a lot of the problems that exist in society now have to do with the structure of our political systems. I think it has to do with how those systems are influenced and who's doing the influencing and the interests to which that influence is done. And so, yeah, we're going to need political systems, but we're also going to have to ensure that they're not captured by specified classes who utilize them to meet their interests, which seems to come at the detriment of society broadly, whichever class that might be. A singular class cannot capture our broad social institutions because then they just become engines for maintaining their interests. And this, as I would argue, historically does not work well for most humans.
Exactly.
I just
wasn't it George Orwell who wrote all in one of his books at I think it's Animal Farm, where he wrote all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others.
Yeah, I've heard that line before.
So it's this is the thing I was mentioning earlier. Like it's a very lofty ideal to think that the people holding the strings of the puppets are going to play fair all the time.
Of course not. I don't think they are, but I also think that there's way more of us than there are them. And as has always happened, we've overcome the power that they've held over society and have made the requisite changes to moving society forward. The thing is that this idea of revolutions happening as a result of antagonism between classes, further developing the productive forces, and in turn further progressing society, that's not a thing that we as humans choose to do. Those are inevitable features of how society develops in virtue of how it's structured. We can't stop these revolutions from happening. They happen because of how human society is structured, and how that structure of human society relates, however that relation may be defined, to the progress that human society undergoes. And currently, because we live under a class society, and we have for about 6,500 years, the higher classes will always resist the changes that ultimately threaten their power. However, and this goes back to that word dialectical and dialectical materialism. I'm going to use an example that I can't remember his name, but he's a Marxist advocate. I think he personally identifies as a Leninist. I don't, but the example that he used in one of the articles I read by him on dialectical materialism is, think of like what happens when you plant a seed in the ground. And then the seed is going to start absorbing nutrients because it wants to maintain itself. The seed, and I'm sort of anthropomorphizing the seed here, but I think everybody can kind of understand why I'm doing that. I don't literally mean the seed has desires and wants and everything, but the seed sort of wants to like maintain itself. And in order to do that, it's got to take up all these nutrients. But the thing is that in so doing, it inevitably brings about the next stage of development and develops into a seedling, which is not a seed. So then the seedling is now we have the state of where it's a seedling, and the seedling wants to retain itself. And so it pulls all these nutrients and water and all the stuff that plants need to try to maintain itself, but inevitably brings about the next stage of development, a sapling, which is not a seedling. So in an attempt to retain itself, it inevitably brings about the next stage of development. And it's the same with class society. In virtue of the upper echelons of society trying to retain the systems that afford them their wealth and power, they will inevitably bring about a revolution that further develops beyond those kinds of structures, at least to some extent.
And ultimately, when it's a tree, there's nothing that grows around it, and nothing grows in the shade, I'm afraid.
Well, I mean, there are some plants that can grow in shade, but I get what you're getting at. Yeah.
I had a question, Leo, and it again may like it's coming from a place of utter cluelessness, but that's me to a T. So I like asking questions. How do I tell if I'm a Marxist?
Do you identify as a Marxist? It's kind of like, how do you tell if you're a woman?
Well,
like, do you identify as one?
That's a really good point because obviously it's a label. It implies a certain number of characteristics in terms of my outlook on life. How I think maybe I put it another way. How would you tell, or how would you decide whether I am a Marxist or something else?
What's the checklist, in other words, Leo?
So this is going to be probably very unsatisfactory, but I would determine whether somebody is a Marxist by asking them, because even if I hear somebody talk, which I have, a buddy of mine that I know, Ben Blake Speed Watkins, you guys might have seen him. He's been on the channel a couple of times. He's not a Marxist. He's sort of more, I think, kind of like Hegelian with some of that stuff. But a lot of the ideals he talks about are very much Marxian. They sound Marxist. And I asked him one day, are you a Marxist? And he said, no, I really hold to a lot of these Hegelian ideals. So I think that even if I hear somebody express what sounds like a lot of Marxian ideals and concepts, I don't think that necessarily makes them a Marxist. I would say that willful adherence to dialectical materialism, historical materialism, as well as the labor theory of value, if somebody said, oh, I adhere to all of those, I think it would be meaningful to say that they are a Marxist. And if they didn't like that, they're at least very much Marxian in their thinking.
And
or possibly,
what is the difference? Yeah, sorry, Ian. I
was just going to say possibly just a Marxist ally, like you have in the sort of LGBTQ community.
Sort of like Marxist adjacent.
I think it's probably fair, and I think it would be really interesting to have you sort of maybe off screen interrogate my position and see how much you think it's it correlates to or complies with a Marxist view. It would genuinely be interesting to identify where there are especially where there are differences in how I approach things to how you think a typical Marxist would approach them. I think it's those differences that really, because ultimately my view is almost everyone who gets interested in politics is trying to do so to maximize the benefit. Now, whether it's for themselves or for a wide group of people, they're trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
I think that what tells, or what really distinguishes various people from various others when it comes to political viewpoints is how do you try to achieve that level of positivity, of benefit for as many people as possible. And that's where I think it'd be really interesting to have a conversation that goes a bit deeper into what we're trying to do politically.
There is one thing I want to say about that, if I may, quickly, and that's that I think that for me, and there are probably much more people out there that would disagree with me on this than that would agree, but I have reasons for what I think are good reasons for thinking it. I think most people's politics are formed by their material conditions. The big thing with Marxism, because, and this is a point I do like to stress a lot, because Marxism is not a normative theory. It doesn't tell us how we ought or ought not act or behave. It's just a way of looking at things, analyzing aspects of the natural world, such as human society, its structure, and how it progresses. And the concept of material conditions is probably material conditions, class structure. Those two things are like the central feature of a Marxian analysis of human society. We live under a class structure. There are different classes of humans, and a difference in those classes informs different interests because you live under different conditions. And living under different conditions is going to inform different interests, is going to inform different politics. This is why the wealthy want lower taxes, want less regulations, want more of a revolving door between, the capitalist class and government, because that's what their interests are. Their interests are with maintaining their wealth, maintaining their, and the thing is, it's not that like all these billionaires are, they're these evil overlords. I'm going to take over society. No, it's just, that's what their interests are because of where they exist in the class society. These aren't like disgustingly evil people. Most of these people, if they saw somebody drowning, would do everything they could to run out and save them. Like, they're not bad humans. It's just that their interests are formed by the class that they fall into. And they are in a class that is drastically different. I have to say it. Nobody, none of us in here and none of us in the side chat, unless you're a billionaire, which I doubt, because why are you here, has any idea what it's like to live as a billionaire. Be able to get on a plane, get on your own plane, not have to go through any of the airport bullshit and go to something. We don't know what it's like to live like that. And that's why we don't have the same.
I have my suspicions about Hein. I think he may be a secret billionaire.
I wish I was. No, no, you're quite right, Leo. I have no idea how that is, and I mean, I'm not particularly curious about it either.
I would agree. I don't really care about how billionaires live, because the way I look at it is, I'm a human, and like all humans, I don't really think that being thrust into a different class that I'm going to retain all of the interest that I have. I think one can. It's not like impossible to be a billionaire and like actually work with governments to funnel billions of dollars into like programs that like help with world hunger and stuff like that. It's not impossible. It's just that, what billionaires have actually done that? And why is it that billionaires never actually seem to do the things that we would expect them to do? Well, because of the interests that they have. You get thrust into that class, your interests are going to change. Maybe not right away, maybe not all of them, but a lot of your interests are going to change.
Yeah. I think it's an unfortunate result of just the human condition. I think we are inherently selfish or self-centered in our approach, and the whole idea of socialism, and from what I've learned today about Marxism, is the opposite of that. It's more of a it starts more from the bottom up as opposed from the top down. So it's going to I don't know why, I'm in such a conflict now, because I don't know, growing up, all these, I was always the Marxists and the Stalinists and the Leninists were always these boogeymen out to come and get the capital, come and get our capitalist societies and corrupt us into becoming these working class zombie atheists. And
well, you gotta give me most atheists are zombies because we don't have souls.
And that's
Yeah, in that sense, I think they've won.
Like this, I mean, willingly or unwillingly, in your subconscious, this kind of messaging stays with you, and it's very good to have these kind of conversations, because I'm always open to any idea that can better humanity and better society, and nothing that you've said today has been objectionable or raised any red flags for me. I mean, I am like, where do I sign up for that?
Indeed, that's precisely why I was asking earlier. How do I tell if I already am one? Because as you've pointed out, nothing that has been said has been objectionable in any way. So I guess my view is, well, how close am I to this? And we come back to it, and I apologise for this, Leo, but we come back to the ideal of Marxism. How close am I to that? And that's it's not a question that I was expecting coming into this. I genuinely more closely identify with what you're talking about now than I did coming in, and that's a fantastic thing.
There's a few things I would like to say, if I may. Number one, that's kind of how it was with me. I started, once 2020 hit, I got fired from my job for reasons I'm not going to get into, but it was bullshit. I know everybody says that, but it was not. It was, anyway. And I just started reading.
Me too.
There was a lot going around because I was watching Vosh at the time, and he identified as a Marxist. And I'm like, you know what? I have never actually. I've read the Communist Manifesto once, and I was like a sophomore in high school. So I read it, but did I really understand? Like, did I make an attempt to understand the words? I don't think I did. So I read that again, and I was like, but wait, like, I don't just like this kind of sounds kind of based. Like, what? And so I started reading more. Then I read Socialism, Utopian and Scientific, and then I read the first volume of Capital by Marx, and read so I've read some parts of Transitional Program that was written by Trotsky, I believe. Yeah, State and Revolution was written by Lenin. I've read small parts of that. And I was like, wait, but like this stuff makes sense to me. Like this, I've always been told that this is evil, take over the world, madman, kind of typical villain stuff. And I'm just like, but wait, this just seems like a way of looking at how society is structured and developed and how that plays into where we're at and where we're going. And then I was like, well, I guess I'm just a Marxist. With respect to what Dean said, I think I would disagree that humans are intrinsically selfish. It's something I used to believe, but I'm sure you guys have probably heard of her. I don't know if she's been on this channel. If not, you guys should have her on for something because she's fucking brilliant. Pardon my language. I'm sorry. Pardon my language. And that's and that's Erica Gutsick Gibbon. She did her research master's in primatology and is now, I believe, in a PhD program in, I want to make sure I get this right, paleoanthropology, I believe. And she's the one that told me it's really not true that humans are intrinsically selfish.
But that's the thing, isn't it? Altruism appears in any hierarchical or group society in the animal kingdom as well.
Yes.
It isn't just it's certainly not a phenomenon that's linked to or limited to humans. It genuinely is a natural thing to care for other members of your group.
Yep. And the thing about selfishness is...
sorry, I have to interrupt you. The question though is, to what degree are humans altruistic and selfish? Are people like 70% altruistic? Are they 50%? Are they 30%? 10%?
I'd say that's difficult to say.
And with respect to that, because I was going to kind of touch on some stuff there, I think that at least with how society is structured, there is sort of this balance, differential, I don't know, however you want to word it, between, you know, altruistic and selfish. But I don't think it's because of anything intrinsic to humans, because I think, again, a lot of those interests are informed by the conditions under which we live. People aren't selfish because they're intrinsically selfish. They're selfish because, given the structures of society that we live under, it's beneficial for them to be selfish. People might not be as altruistic as they could be, not because they're not an altruistic person, but because of the social systems that we live under don't provide much of an incentive to be maybe as altruistic as we could be as humans. That a lot of those problems are not things intrinsic to humans per se, so much as they are resulting from the interests that humans end up having or developing as a result, again, of the structure of society. And this is where, in Marxism, looking at how society is structured and how that influences or informs the interests that humans have is an integral part of understanding the world and why, you know, human society is kind of the way that it is today.
I mean, that to me is fascinating. I love that as a topic. That's just been. It's given me so much to think about and so much to go away and research and you know, increase my understanding. I love you know, chats like this. This really does. It ticks my boxes.
Yeah.
I like these ones where. No, go ahead.
I was gonna ask. You know, so Marxism, as I understand you, is basically under the umbrella of socialism, correct?
Socialism would be under the umbrella of Marxism. Yeah. Socialism and communism are ideals that developed out of Marx-taking analysis. And so a lot of people would say, well, so how would we implement socialism? Well, we don't. And Marx would have said, you don't do socialism. Socialism is a state, a social state of affairs that humans will inevitably end up evolving into, and then at some point even past. Just like we transcended slavery. We moved into feudalism, and then we moved into monarchism, and then we moved into mercantilism, and then we moved into capitalism. So will humans eventually move into socialism, and then from there into communism, which Marx would have said will be the end state, where humans once again live, where there are no distinctions between classes that inform differences of interests. So like what Ian was saying with respect to Japan, that allows for a greater informing of this sense of duty to not just ourselves, but to everybody in our society. And it might sound idealistic, but I really don't think it is, to say that if we can change the interests that humans have by changing how human society is structured, we can in fact change how people engage in the world, and we can change people with respect to doing more to help each other and to maintain society. A lot of people ask, well, how in a Marxist society are you going to get people cleaning out sewers? Well, I have to be honest, I think that because people are going to recognize it's a thing that needs to be done, and they're going to come together to ensure that we can do it, to improve things for all of us. Because it won't just be me that benefits from cleaning out the sewer. It will be everybody. Why would I not want to do that? Why would I not want to benefit myself and everybody? However, that kind of mentality is not going to be informed under the structures of society that we currently live.
Yeah, no, I agree, 100%. So, we're more or less running up onto the top of the hour, and I did notice earlier that there were some questions from our audience, but unfortunately, we were like so in the thick of it, we didn't even get to pose them to you. So, if our producer can just maybe go through the history and just find some of those questions so that we can pose them to our guest.
Really quickly, would it be all right if because we've been talking a lot about Marxism, but I want to connect Marxism to secularism. I can spend probably about 3 to 5 minutes kind of explaining why I think if one identifies as secular, Marxism should be something they look into. And particularly if you identify as a secular humanist, not that everybody does, but I do know this channel is big on promoting that ideal. I do think that if not an outright Marxist, I think that secular humanists ought to adopt at least Marxian modes of analysis. And the reason for that is, as I explained with dialectical materialism, we're kind of already starting from this physicalist perspective, that there's just the world around us, the natural world, physical reality. There's not gods and fairies and angels and demons and devils interacting with it and doing it. It's there. It's got some regularities and consistencies and patterns under which it just continuously operates and evolves in time, and human society does the same. Now, so we can kind of see how Marxism is almost intrinsically secular. Now, you can be religious and be a Marxist. Those are not mutually exclusive positions, but you would have to be secular with respect to your Marxian analysis, even if you were religious. Now, Marxism is really connected to secularism through this idea of where there, we have the physical world and humans evolve according to the natural laws and the physical laws and everything. A really good example, rather than defining it, because it can be difficult to define how Marxism is intrinsically secular and why that's important, and why I think people who identify as being secular should at least lend some credence to Marxism, look into it, just to give an example, look at climate change. Now, I'm sure we've all probably at least heard a Christian say, well, I'm not concerned about that. God will fix everything before it gets bad. No, because that's not, under a Marxian view, that's not how the world works. You don't have gods out there doing things. It's us. It's the natural laws. It's up to us to change that. That's why Marxism sort of demands the secularism, because you can't rely on these esoteric, ethereal beings that nobody even really can show actually meaningfully real to change things. That's on us. We've got to do that. It's just the world, the natural world, its natural laws, and our place within it. And we got to figure out what that place is and work to ensure that we can meaningfully perpetuate our existence instead of relying on these esoteric supernatural concepts to do it all for us. So that's harmful to a Marxist, believing in God, to some extent at least, is because it leads you to believe that any problems God would fix before they got too bad. Well, but then we just don't ever solve them, and then we're wiped off the face of the planet because I would say, and I think you guys maybe would as well, because there is no God. So he's not going to come to our rescue. And so we should stop thinking that and maybe try to fix these fucking problems that we're suffering from. And that's why Marxism generally views religion as, again, depending on who you talk to, the extent can differ, but to some extent, religiosity is harmful to society because of how it changes how we think about our responsibilities, our duties, our commitments to ourselves and to each other, and to the perpetuation of our society in meaningful ways. And that's where that secularism
and
really
to
comes.
our protection disease almost.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and to answer your question, this whole panel is atheist as fuck.
I said I'd read out this particular question from Titan Uranus. So Leo, he says, I've recently become a post-left, neo-anti-accelerationist, crypto-nihilist with transhumanist tendencies. How do you feel about that?
Hell yeah, brother. Post-left, neo-anti-accelerationist, crypto-nihilism with transhumanist tendencies for the win, buddy.
I have no doubt he will be delighted to hear that.
Yeah,
I love you, Titan.
Yeah, I mean, this has been fascinating conversation. We're basically running up on the hour, so I think in closing, Leo, because we can go for another hour, I'm sure.
Is there one question that we could talk about? Because I actually think it's a really good question. It's from Wes. It's the one where he talked about property. I don't know if he wants to highlight that quickly. Because I actually think this is a really good question, because the concept of property is important in Marxism, and it is a question that a lot of people have. So most people would understand private property as like your house, your cell phone, your chairs, stuff like that. But it's not to say that that's wrong, but that's a particular context in which we understand private property. To a Marxist, that's not what private property means. Again, to try to define it would be just a little unintuitive. It wouldn't really capture what's being meant. So I think it is better to use an example here, even though I'm not big on using examples to define terms. I'm big on defining the term, but in instances where I just don't think that's going to be helpful for understanding it, I do think that examples are good. I know some of you might not live in the United States. I don't really know how extensive Walmart is around the world, but I'm sure Walmart is a company you all have heard of, the big superstore retailer. It's big in the United States, I think in Canada, stuff like that. So a Walmart, an individual
I think they're
store.
an Asda here, so yeah.
You guys have Walmarts there?
Well, we don't have Walmarts, but I think Walmart owns Asda,
Oh,
which is a fairly
Yeah,
big
they also have their
supermarket chain
fingers
here.
in some pies down here.
But just imagine some superstore in your town or the next town over or something like that. The property that it's on, the actual building. Who owns that? Well, most people say, well, Walmart owns it. Yeah, but Walmart isn't a person, are they? Walmart's an organization. So your phone, your house, your car, what have you, that's personal property. But Walmart isn't owned. That particular Walmart store or Publix or whatever store it might be isn't owned by an individual. You start getting into franchises that can get a little different, but I'm not talking about that right now. I'll table that for the time being. That Walmart store is not owned by a person, but it's still like private. Like it's still, you can't just go to the Walmart parking lot and like take your clothes off and run around naked. Like you're gonna get arrested. That's not how it works. So it is private property, but it isn't owned by a person.
It's owned by shareholders, isn't it?
I would say no. I don't think any one of the shareholders owns that property, that store. I think it's owned by the organization. And that's what private property means, that you've got property that is private, but it isn't really owned by a person. It's sort of owned by an organization, and that this limits mobility and movement of people. I'm not talking about farmers that own land. I'm not talking about you with your house. I'm talking about something like a Walmart store. That concept of private property can be utilized to control and to limit the mobility of humans and things of that nature. And in virtue of that, that notion should be done away with. And I want to emphasize here as much as I can, this is not to say that personal individuals have no right over their personal property. Personal property and private property do not mean the same thing in specifically a Marxian sense. You have every right to own your house, control over who comes in it, all that stuff. But the notion of private property, a Walmart owning this store, that's not a beneficial concept to humans. It's really utilized as a means of maintaining control.
What am I going to do next, Leo? Do I have to plant my own vegetables and go poop in the forest, or what?
Maybe, just maybe.
I genuinely think this is the more you talk, Leo, the more I think I'm accidentally a Marxist, because within my personal manifesto as a political candidate, I have actually said I do not believe that land should be owned by basically non-persons, and it should either be effectively personal property or
public.
Exactly, public ownership and leased effectively back to the organisation that decides it. Yes, I am very aware that this may ruin my political career.
Be very popular.
Thank you for that. It's most definitely not going to be a particularly common thing to see a UK politician say that they identify with anything Marxist. But as I say, I came into this with an open mind and wanting to know if actually the label applied to me and how much it would do. And that, I think, is one of those examples where actually, do you know what? I have already made steps in that particular direction. And it's going to be genuinely interesting to see if someone who does identify as a Marxist would look at my manifesto and go, yeah, that definitely has some flavours of Marxism. I would imagine it will. Mm-hmm. It won't be 100% Marxist because that's almost certainly not the position that I'm coming from. But there will definitely be some flavours of a move direction.
Is there one other thing I might comment? I don't want to take any more time if we've got to wrap up, but there was one other thing with respect to Marxism. And that's
I just want to be mindful of the production crew's time as well. So let's.
So I guess the decision would be up to Wes.
Yeah,
it is more of a quick point. It's not going to be another 10 minutes, I promise.
No. By all means, go for it.
And that's just that. I think it's obvious, regardless of where you stand with respect to Marxism, that there is a stigma, a negative stigma surrounding it. Now, just being honest, I can really only speculate about why that is, but I don't think that means that it's wrong to do so or that I'm incorrect or inaccurate. And I think that if an ideology came about that took a different view with respect to analyzing human society and how it's structured and how it progresses and how its structure and its progress can be related, that threatened that what you could derive from that analysis would inform positions and ideals that might threaten the, say, wealth or power or control of, say, a particular class of individuals, that they would exercise some of that wealth and power to stigmatize this ideal in emotional ways to drive people from it, because that would serve their interests of maintaining the systems as they stand that have afforded them the very wealth and the power that they enjoy. So am I saying, oh, well, it's all a conspiracy because these billionaires just hate Marx? Well, not directly, but I am speculating that I do think they have largely exercised their wealth and their power in ways that have been a direct attempt to stigmatize this ideal, because when we utilize it, we can derive from it a variety of positions that would stand opposed to their interests. And they're going to act in ways that meet their interests. And if it were the case that a widespread adoption of Marxian analytic methodology were to threaten the power and the control over society, I do think one thing we could expect to see from that very powerful class of individuals is an attempt at a stigmatization or a driving away of people from that ideal. And I do think that is largely why Marxism has the stigma that it does. I don't think because it's an intrinsically bad or evil, but because it threatens the power and the wealth of a very specified class of individuals.
Yeah. I mean, it's no coincidence that particularly American politicians like to flaunt that's socialism when you're talking about basic stuff like universal healthcare. That's socialism. We don't want that. And apparently many American voters just take it like that.
Yep.
I mean, I think that one part of the Marxist society would be universal healthcare, but universal healthcare isn't Marxist in and of itself.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. Yeah, 100%. And that's all I have. If
you've given us a lot of food for thought. I've completely reevaluated my stance on this. Good job. So I think we can tie it all in a knot there, because I really have some Googling to do now.
There's only one final thing I want to say, and it's just a sentence. It's just one sentence, and that's that my goal is to not convince people of Marxism. There might be specified instances where I try to do that. My goal is not to have you agree or disagree with it, or, oh, well, I'm a Marxist now. My goal is to just help people understand it. And then from there, they are free to make their own decisions.
That's what I'm saying. It's like you've sparked my interest because everything you said was very agreeable. We would like to, with this, thank you very much for being so generous with your time and
thank you guys
speaking to us. And I'm sure Wes will pop some links, where people can find you in the description of the video. And any closing thoughts, Ian, Hein?
I genuinely. Oh yeah.
Ooh, yeah. Okay. Well, about Marxism, I like to make a little joke about that. Yes, I am a Marxist, but that's a Groucho tendency. No respect to Marx.
Oh, I like Marxist jokes. They're funny. Even some of the ones that kind of like joke about it being something bad, I still find to be funny.
Yeah. But anyway, my point is that I live in a nation, the Netherlands, that it has a reasonably good social infrastructure, both in social security, healthcare, education. It's not brilliant, but weirdly enough, at the same time, it's one of the most unequal societies, economies, with respect to rich and poor. I mean, the poor aren't particularly poor, but the rich are very rich.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a weird thing, and I think that we need to change that, because I think we can all have better lives.
I'm with you.
I mean, bringing that change is difficult, but I'm pretty sure it's possible.
I agree.
And you push a lot, and you need to do a lot of propaganda, talk a lot, make sure that people, when they fill in the ballot, fill in the right party, and not because of some idiot who says things that feel good.
I would just like to quote a U.S. president really quickly, if I may. I can't remember which one said this.
Yeah, hopefully not a recent one.
I think it's a quote most people will have heard.
I'm going to be happy.
We do these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Yeah.
We put a man on the moon, and we can practically robotically control robots on a planet 145 million miles away. Do not sit here and tell me we can't put foods in the mouth of literally every human. I just reject that. We just don't do it because we don't have the interest in doing it. Wonder why?
Yeah.
The spirit moves me. Amen, brother.
Yeah, that's. I mean, there is.
Yeah. Sorry, go for it.
Yeah. Well, there's one thing to leave my final comment. I mean, there's a real way to explain socialism, Marxism, if you like, in a few words. Essentially, we require of everyone to do what they can, and we will give them what they need. And more is, I mean, there's quite a bit more to it, but that's the kernel.
Yeah.
In terms of my final thoughts, I'll keep it relatively brief. We had a couple of Star Trek mentions, so I figure, there we are. Yeah. Everyone should just live long and prosper. And that's it.
Yeah. Thank you, gentlemen. It's been a real pleasure. We'll catch all of you out there on the flip side.
Thank you, guys.